Hello everyone, this is Ryan King and welcome to this Blender tutorial where we're going to be creating this completely procedural planet in Blender. So we're just going to be adding an icosphere or a sphere, and then everything else is going to be procedural other than just adding like a plane in the background, and we'll be making like a procedural star texture, and then we will be using a sun lamp and pointing that at the Earth. So we're going to be creating this completely procedural planet material, and this is just one material, and you can see it's very, very detailed. So you can see that we have like all of this land here. So we have like some areas that are more of a desert, and then like right over here there's some more green parts, and then there's also some more brown parts. So we're going to be creating that material, and then we're also going to be mixing it with some water. So we're going to be using some procedural textures and creating where we want the water to be, and then we're going to be mixing with that with the land, and then adding a little bit of bump here to make the land coming out of the water. Then we're also going to be making the beaches a little bit of a lighter blue color, because I looked at a lot of reference images of the Earth from space, and usually the beaches have a little bit of a lighter colored water, so I'm going to be doing that as well. Then we're also going to be adding mountains onto the land. So you can see that there's some little spots here where they kind of come up and they're a bit lighter. So we're going to be creating that and then adding that on. And then we're also going to be adding clouds. So I'm going to have two different types of clouds. We're going to have these really puffy clouds right here, and then we're going to mix that with these clouds here, which kind of move a bit more. It almost looks like they're moving on like a wind path or something. So we will be doing that as well. And then we'll also be adding in city lights at the dark areas. So you can see that the light is coming from this side, and so you can see right over here in the shadow, we're going to be adding these little things in here to look like cities at night. And then we're also going to be adding this atmosphere, so you can see that there's kind of like this blue, light blue right over here, and then it's also glowing a little bit. We'll be adding in that as well. And then you couldn't see it in the final render, but we're also going to be adding the North Pole and the South Pole on the top and the bottom of the Earth. So here we are on the top of the Earth, and this is the North Pole. And then here's the South Pole down here on the bottom of the Earth. So we're going to be adding that in as well. Alright, now here is the completed finished node setup for the procedural Earth material. Now if this looks really overwhelming and complicated, don't worry, I will walk you through the entire process step by step. And as we create it, I'm going to do my best to explain what we're doing and why we're doing it and the result that you'll get as we create it. And so my goal by the end of this is that you will actually understand what all this stuff does. I know it does look pretty complicated, but I will break it down into little steps. And then one more thing that I wanted to show you, we're even going to make it so that the lights in the darkness adapt to the daytime. And we're going to be rigging this sun lamp so when you press G to grab, it's going to follow the Earth and you can just move it around. So this way, if you want to like animate it or just make it daytime or nighttime, you can just move this around and the lights are going to adapt. So you can see that wherever the darkness is, that is where the lights are going to be. And then you can just change this around. So you can just move this around and the lights are going to adapt. So you can see now here is the back of the Earth. It's nighttime here, and you can see there are all these city lights. And of course, if you want to rotate the Earth, you can just double tap R and you can move it around. So if you want to see different parts of the Earth, like look at different islands or things like that, you can just double tap R and rotate the Earth around and you'll be able to see all the different sides. Just a couple more things before we get started. If you'd like to help support what I do and also get the finished Blender file for this project, then you can do that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The link is in the description. And then one last thing before we get started, I wanted to thank this video's sponsor, Sketchfab. Sketchfab is an awesome 3D model site where you can preview 3D models in your browser. You can even view them in AR, VR, or on a phone or tablet. They also have a 3D model store where you can purchase models and assets. You can even apply to sell your own models on the platform. Check out Sketchfab with the links in the description. Alright, so here we are in a new scene in Blender, and let's get started. So I'm first just going to start by deleting the cube, and we're going to press Shift A. And I'm going to use an icosphere. I like to use icospheres because they're very smooth. So once you add the icosphere, right down here, the icosphere settings right behind me, just click right there and you can see the subdivisions. I'm going to turn this up higher so that it's very smooth. So I think I'm going to turn this up to a 6 and then I'll just close this. And then let's also shade this object smooth so that it's very smooth. All right, so let's click on this lamp right here. I want to turn this into a sun lamp. So I'm going to click right down here on these settings right here. And I want to turn this to sun and then just point it at the earth, maybe kind of bring it down and rotate it over. All right, and then I also want to point the camera directly at the earth. So I'm just going to zoom in here and then I'm going to press Control-Alt-Numpad 0 and that's going to hop the camera to where we are. I can now just select the camera and then I can press G to grab. I can also press G and double tap Z and that's going to move me in or out. And then I want this to be a square image. You could have it like 1080p, but I want it to be a square. So I'm going to click right here on these render settings and the resolution, the bottom one, the Y value, I'm going to turn this to 1920 so that they are both the same. Then I can just press G and double tap Z and just kind of move this in towards the earth and then I'll just go into the rendered preview. All right, now if I click over on the world here, this color here, I just want it to be very, very dark, but not fully dark because if it's fully dark, you can't see any of the back of the world. I just want to be able to see a tiny bit of the earth, but not very much. So I'm just going to bring this up to something like this so it's pretty dark, but not fully dark. And then if I just select the sun lamp, go to the sun lamp settings, the strength is way too strong. So I'm going to turn this up to maybe just like a 5. And that looks a lot better. All right, so let's go over to the shading tab here. And then I want the 3D view to be right here and then the nodes to be here. So I'm just going to click and pull this over. And then I'm gonna click right here when the crosshair appears, click, drag up, and then let go to close that. Then right over here with the crosshair, I'm gonna click and drag out. And then I'm going to click on this and I just want to change this to the 3D view. And then I'll press 0 to go into the camera view. And then also I only want it to render what's in the camera view. So I'm going to press Control B, click and drag around the camera, and then that way it'll only render in the camera. Now I can just press Z, move my mouse up to go into the render preview. And then also this little widget right here, I'm just going to click on this button to hide it. So let's click on Use Nodes, and this will add some nodes here. And we have the lamp selected. That's fine. I'm just going to click on the world. And then I'm going to click on New. And then let's call this material Procedural Earth. All right, and then one more thing before we start adding nodes, I'm going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on. So if you don't have that turned on, you can just go to Edit and then go to the Preferences. And then right here on add-ons, you can just start to type in Node and then just turn on this Node Wrangler add-on. This is really useful and it's built into Blender, so you can just turn that on and we'll be using it in the video. All right, so let's finally add the first node. So I'm gonna press Shift A and I'm gonna start with a good old noise texture. Just gonna drop the noise texture right here. And then with this node selected, I'm gonna press Control T and that's going to add a texture coordinate and mapping. Now the mapping node, I'm not gonna be using this. So with this selected, I'm just gonna press Control X and that'll get rid of it, but still keep this connected. Now I actually wanna change this to the object. So on the texture coordinate, I'm just gonna change that to object. And basically what we're doing right now is we're starting to create the shader for the land. So like some of the parts are a bit more green and some of the parts are a bit more brown and yellow. All right, so because we have the Node Wrangler add-on turned on, what I can do is I can hold down the Control and Shift key and click on a node, and that's going to preview it. So you can see with generated, it's just not quite mapped as nicely. It's pretty good, but I find that the object coordinates just work a lot better. It helps to put the texture very evenly around the object. And especially for procedural stuff, it works really well. All right, now the scale here, I'm gonna change this to something around 4.4. I find that works pretty well. You can scale it to whatever you like. And then the detail here, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 16 because I want it to be very high detail. And then the roughness, I think I'll just turn this up to like a 0.6. So just turn it up a little bit, just so that it has a little bit more detail. All right, so right now this is just black and white and we want to tell it what colors we want it to use. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a color ramp node. And I'll just drop the color ramp node right here and then just press Control and Shift and click on it to preview it. So now we can start adding in colors. So we can actually change these different tabs here. So this first one, this black one here, I am going to just click on the little tab, the black tab, and then click on the color. And I'm just going to make it a dark green. I'll just make it very saturated and turn it down, just something like that. And then I'll also just pull this up because I want there to be a lot more green. Now this white tab here, I'm going to click on this and I'm just going to change this to like a brown color and somewhat dark, so just something like that. And then let's also pull this tab up because I want there to be more brown. So you can see when I pull these two tabs together, it starts to get more and more contrasty. So I'll just bring it to something like there. Now I also want there to be a bit of a lighter brown. So I'm going to click on the plus here to add a new node. And then let's just bring it over here. Now this one, I want this one to be still brown, but a bit of a lighter brown. So I'm going to make it a brown color, but then we'll just make it brighter. All right, so you can see what's happening now. If you look at our world, it's starting to have some really cool colors and texture, because you can see some of these parts are a bit more green, maybe like a forest or a jungle or something. And then there's some brown parts and then also some lighter brown parts just to give it some more variation. All right, now I also want to give it more detail. So I want to add another noise texture and change it up a bit. So I'm going to click on this noise texture and then hold down the shift key and click on the texture coordinate. And then I'll press shift to duplicate them and move them up. Now this texture coordinate, the object is still going to be plugged into the noise texture. So if you wanted to, you could just like delete this one and then plug them both up to the same one. I'm just going to keep both the texture coordinates, but if you wanted to, you could just use the same one for both textures. All right, now let's control shift and click on this noise texture. So for this one, the scale I want to be about 2, and then the detail, I'll turn this up to about 10, just so it's not quite as detailed. You can see now it looks just a little bit different. Now I want to give this texture a lot of detail and give it some sort of like swirly bits and just give it some nice random noise. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture, and then we'll just drop the Voronoi texture right in here. So we're not actually going to use the noise texture as the main texture. We're actually going to use this and put it through the vector to help distort the Voronoi texture. Now let's control shift and click on the Voronoi texture and click on the distance one. So holding down the control and shift key, click on the distance. And then this 3D here, I want to change this to 4D. And then this F1 here, I'm going to change this to distance to edge. So you can see what it's doing. And without this, if I just click on this noise texture and press M to mute it, you can see this is what it looks like. But then if I press M, you can see that the noise texture distorts the Voronoi texture and it gives it a really cool look. Now the scale, I'm going to turn this up pretty high to something like a 28, so it's very detailed. And then also, I don't want the factor of the noise texture to be going into the Voronoi texture. I want to use the color because I find that that just looks a little bit better. So you can see how it is right now, but if I just take the color and put that into the vector, you can see it has a completely different result because the factor and the color, they look different because this actually has color data. So you can see it gives it a totally different result. And I really like that you can zoom way in and there's all this detail in here. So that's what we're going to be using. All right, now again, just like this one, the noise texture doesn't look very good on its own. So we're going to use a color ramp to tell it what colors we want to use. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm just going to search for a color ramp. We'll just drop it here. And then the distance, I'm going to plug that up to the factor. Now let's control shift and click on the color ramp so that we can preview it, and then we'll start playing around with these colors. So this one right here, this black one, I want this one to be a green one. So we're going to make it a green color, somewhat dark. And I want it to be a little bit more on the yellow side. So something like this. You can see this one is a bit more yellow. Now let's click on this white tab. I want to pull this white tab out here so that it's more contrasty. And then this one, I kind of want to make like a tan kind of yellowish color. Something like that I think is pretty good. And then you can play around with this. So if you want it to be more green or if you want it to be more sandy, just play around with that until you get it how you like. All right, so now if I control shift and click on this one, we have this cool texture right here, and then I can control shift and click on this one, and we have this cool one right here. So what I want to do is actually mix these together and then put them into the base color. So I'm going to press Shift A here, and I'm going to search for a mix, and we're going to just add the mix RGB. Now I need a little bit more space, so I'm going to press B and just box select, and then just bring this out. So this one right here, I'm going to plug this one into the bottom one. And then this one right here, I'm going to plug this into the top one. And if I control shift and click on this, you can see what it looks like. And then the factor, I want to change this to something like a 0.35. You can change this to whatever you like. If you like more of one of the textures, you can just do whatever you like. I like about 0.35, and you can see now that has a lot more detail. So I'm going to press B for the box select, just select all these nodes and then bring them back and down a little bit, just so that we have a little bit more room. And then let's take this color and we're going to plug it into the base color. So if I control shift and click on it and then zoom out here, you can see this is what our Earth is looking like so far. Now I probably should have done this earlier, but we should probably save our files, and that way if Blender crashes we don't lose anything. So let's just go File and then click on Save As. I'm just going to save this as Procedural Earth Tutorial on my computer. Let's just save that. Alright, so to try to make this a little bit easier to understand when we start to get a lot of nodes and it starts to get really complex, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add frames, and then I'm going to stick all the nodes in different frames so that they're easier to understand. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a frame, just drop it right here, and then what I can do is just box select all the nodes, and just click and drag and drop them in there, and you can see that now they're in the frame. Now this material output, I don't really want that in the frame. So if for some reason you accidentally put one of the nodes in a frame, what you can do is just select the node and then press Alt P, and you can see that now it's free of the frame. Now this frame, it has a name here, frame, but we can actually rename this. So I'm going to select the frame, and then I'll press N, and that's going to open up this side panel. Now you can see right here on item, there is a name and a label. So I can just name this land material. Okay, and then what I can do is just hover my mouse over this, press Ctrl C, and then hover my mouse over the label and press Ctrl V. So they're both land material, and you can see now that says land material. I'm just going to press N to close that panel. Alright, so this is looking pretty cool, but I want to have some parts be like a desert. So I want to have some parts be a bit more yellow colored. So I'm going to make a desert up here, and then we will connect it into the color. So I'm going to press Shift A here, and I'm going to search for another noise texture. We're just going to drop it up here. And then I'm going to press Ctrl T, and then let's just click on the mapping and press Ctrl X, and that'll just get rid of it. And then the object, I want to put that into the vector. Now the scale here, I want to change this to something like a 3.8. Let's just Control Shift and click on this so we can see it. And then the roughness, I think I'll turn this up to like a 0.6. And then the detail, I think something around 4 is going to look pretty good. So there's a little bit of a detail, not too much, but a bit of detail. So let's just Control Shift and click on the noise texture, and the scale here, I think change this to something around 7 will look pretty good. And then the detail, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 16, so it's very detailed. And then the roughness, I'm going to turn this up to something like a 0.61. I think that looks pretty good. And the distortion, I'll just turn this up to like a 0.1, so there's just a tiny bit of distortion. So that looks pretty good. Now again, I want to add a color ramp in here to tell it what colors I want it to be. So I'm going to press Shift A. We're going to search for a color ramp, and I'm just going to drop the color ramp right here. Now this black one right here, I'm going to pull this out, and then I'm going to change it to a light yellowish orangish color. So just pretty bright, something kind of like this, a very bright yellow orange. And then this one, let's also change this one to a bit of a darker yellow, more of an orange color. Not too dark though, I think something like that is pretty good. And then we'll also drag this out to make it more contrasty. So now what we can do is we can just take this mix down here, and we can press Shift D to duplicate it and just drop it right here, because we want to mix this in to the color. And then also right up here, let's just press Shift A and add another frame. I'm just going to drop this down here, and then we'll just box select these, and we'll just drop them into the frame. So I'm just going to name this to Desert, and then we'll just click on this, press Ctrl C, and then Ctrl V to paste that. Alright, so this color ramp here, I want to plug the color into the color right here. So now if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see what it's doing. Now the problem with this is that right now this is just mixing it evenly between, and what I want is I want some parts to be the desert, but then the rest of it to be the rest of the land. So this isn't going to work. What we need to do is change this up a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is click right here. Instead of changing it to mix, I'm going to turn it to add. Now what we need to do is this factor here, instead of it evenly being one or the other, I want to give it a mask to tell it where I want to be the desert and where I want it to be the rest of the material. So let me just bring this down here. What I need to do is click on this noise texture and also Shift and click on the texture coordinate. And I'm going to press Shift D and move them up. And I want to keep them in this desert frame. because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this noise texture to create some parts where there is going to be the desert, and then some other places where there aren't going to be the desert. So if I just control shift and click on this noise texture, we can preview it. Now the scale here, I'm going to change this to like a 3.8. I think that looks pretty good. And then the detail here, I'll just change this to like a 4 because I don't want it to be super detailed because we're just making a mask. Now I need to press shift A and also add a color ramp here. I'm just going to drop this color ramp right in here. And then if I control shift and click on this, I need to start to drag these out. So if I drag the black one out, it's going to be more contrasty. And then if I drag the white one in, it's going to be even more contrasty. So what we're telling Blender is that the white values, that's where the desert is going to be. And then wherever the dark parts are, that's where the rest of the earth is going to be. So what I'm going to actually do is take this white value and just drag it down. And then I'll just drag the black value up a bit because I don't want there to be too much desert, just a little bit here and there. And then this white value, if I just click on it, I want to make sure it's all the way up to fully white. Alright, so now what I can do is I can use this as the factor. So if I just take the color and plug this into the factor, and then I control shift and click on this. So what this is doing is we set this to add, we set this mix RGB to add. And so what that's telling it to do is we want to add this color right here, this desert, and we want to add that to this color right here, which is the rest of the earth. And then the factor, instead of it just being even, we're using this to tell it that the white values, that's going to be where the desert is. And then the rest of the values, the black values, that's where the green and brown is going to be. So let's just control shift and click on the principled BSDF and we can preview that. All right, just press control S to save your project and let's continue. So what I also want to do is I want to add a noise texture to make it pretty rough, because you can see if I zoom in here, it's very, very smooth and almost just looks like a shiny ball, but the earth of course is very, very rough. It has mountains and lakes and rivers and all sorts of things, and we're looking at it from really far away, so just adding a little bit of noise would really help. So I'm going to click on this noise texture, shift click on the texture coordinate, and we'll press shift D and just bring it down. And I still want it in the frame, and that is great. Now the scale here, I want to turn this up to something like 50, and let's control shift and click on this so that we can see it. So you can see there it has a lot of detail. And then the roughness, I think I'll turn this to something like a 0.57. And then the distortion, I'll turn this up to something like a 0.2, just so that it has a little bit of distortion. All right, so now we can take this noise texture and we can add it into the normal right here to give it some bump. So I'll just take the factor, plug that into the normal, and then we need to convert this to normal data, because if I just click on the principle, you can see something is definitely wrong here. That's because this is just black and white. It's just the factor here, and you can see this is gray, but then this one right here, this is purple because it's normal. So to convert this to normal data, I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a bump node. And I'll just drop the bump node right in here. And then this is for a normal map, but we are using height because we want to convert this to normal. So we're going to plug this noise texture into the height. And now if you control shift and click on it, you can see that is great. And we can control shift and click on this to preview it. Now this is way too strong, so I'm going to turn the strength down to a 0.095. So that way it's a lot less bumpy. You can still see the bumpiness there, but it's a lot less bumpy. All right, now the earth also needs to have a lot of water. Most of the top surface is actually water, so I want to add water in as well. So what I need to do is I need to create a mask and then tell it that some parts are going to be the water and some parts are going to be the land. So again, I'm going to click on this, shift click on this, and we'll press Shift D and just bring it down. And then again, if you wanted to, these texture coordinates, they're all doing the same thing. So if you just want to use one of them and like plug them all up and just have one of them, you could. I'm just going to use all these four so that it looks very nice and even. These are just going right over. So we're going to be using this noise texture to tell it where the land is going to be and where the water is going to be. So the scale, this is way too high, so I'm going to turn this down to like a 0.9. And let's just control shift and click on this so we can preview it. Now it's not contrasty at all, and we actually want to make this very contrasty so that we can really tell where the water is and where the land is. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a color ramp. Just drop this in here. We'll just bring this down. And then we need to click on these and start to pull them in to make it very, very contrasty. So you can see that there's the black and white, and that's where the land is going to be and the water is going to be. So we need to zoom way in and just turn these way up and just put them really, really close to each other. So just bring these really, really close together, something like that. And then also if you want to double tap R just to rotate this around, you can kind of see how this is. Now, for some reason, you don't really like how this looks. If you want to change it a bit, one thing you can do is like change this. So if I just kind of do this over here, you can see now this would be like a lot of water, and there'd only be like some little islands. If you want to be a much more watery planet, or if you want there to be less water, you could like drag this over and just do something like that on the other side. But you can see now that kind of looks like water as well. Of course, it does depend on which one you want to have. So if you want to have the black one be the water or the black one be the land, you can choose that, whichever one you want to do. So just play around with this. I find that somewhere around here works pretty well. And then also, if you don't really care too much about the shapes, you can edit that as well. So for instance, this scale here, if you want there to be a lot more little bits there, like if you want it to be a lot more detailed, you could turn that up to something like that. That looks pretty cool. Or if you want there to be just a bunch of big chunks, you could make it a lot smaller. And that way there's only like a few islands here, and then there's like a bunch of big land masses. So really whatever you want to do, I'm just going to do 0.9. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, one more thing is that also if you want to just move this around and play around with the actual shapes, like maybe you just don't really care for these island shapes, you could press Shift A and search for a mapping node. Just drop the mapping node right here. And then what you can do is you can take this location and you can play around with this. So there's the Z, there is the Y, and there is the X. And because this is a completely procedural noise texture, it's just going to generate more and more land. So you can just play around with this, just move the location around. If you don't like this, just kind of change it to some random values. And you can see it's just going to continue to change, and really just play around with this until you get it how you like. So it's really up to you. Just do whatever you want. Just kind of pull these around until you get some land masses that look pretty cool. And then again, if you want to just play around with this, I think maybe I want there to be a little bit more water, and I think the black will be the water. So I can just pull these out to give it more contrast, and that looks pretty good. All right, now I want this to be contributing to the bump because I want where the oceans are to kind of go down in. So I want to duplicate this bump, and then we'll add them all together. So I'm going to click on this, press Shift D, and then we're just going to drop it right down here. Now, what I want to do is this noise texture, I need this to be plugged up to the height. So we'll plug that up and then Control Shift and click on this, and that is working. But now that this has been converted to normal data, this can now go into the normal. So we'll just take it out of the height and put it into the normal. This one here also needs to be converted to normal data. So this color, I can drop this into the height, and now we are adding them both together. So if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see that. And then if I Control Shift and click on this, I can turn the strength up so you can see it. So now there's this one being converted into normal data through the height, and then this one's already normal data. So it's going into the normal, and then this one is being converted as well, and then that goes into the normal. So now you can see this is the result that we're getting. And then the strength here on this one, I think I'll just turn this down to like a 0.4 so that it's a little less strong. All right, and that is looking pretty good. So you can see that right here, this is like the landmass, and it looks like it's bumping out. And then right here, this is where all the water is going to be, and it'll be going back in just a little bit. And that'll kind of make it look like there's some beaches. Now, one thing that I want to do, you can see if I just go into the camera view, just kind of zoom in here, you can see that this is kind of long, like how far it goes down. It's kind of long. I want there to be those little bits of detail there, but I don't want it to be very big. So if you just zoom way in, you can start to squeeze these together even more. Just get them really close as you possibly can. And you can see that now that's getting smaller and smaller. So those beaches, those kind of dips are a lot smaller, and that is better. Now you can select the earth and kind of double tap R and kind of move this around. You can do this throughout the creation process. But if you just kind of want to get to a cool looking part of like land and ocean, you can just move this around to something that looks cool. All right, so now we can go ahead and create the water. So I'm just going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a frame, and we're just going to drop the frame down here. And then can you guess what I'm going to add? I'm going to press Shift A and add another noise texture. So let's just drop the noise texture into this frame, and then I can press Shift A and we're going to add a texture coordinate. We'll just drop that right in the frame, and then the object, I want that to be on the vector. We can now Control Shift and click on this to preview it. Now for this one, the scale, I want to turn this up pretty high to something like a 70. And then the detail, I'll turn this up to like 15. And that way it has a nice bit of detail. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to turn these into the ripples on the water. So the water does have little ripples and noise. So I want to use this as a normal map on the ocean. Now we haven't added any shader yet. So let's do that. I'm going to press Shift A and search for the principled shader. We'll just drop this right in here and then bring it over. And then I can just take the factor and plug this up to the normal right here. Let's also rename this. So if I click on the frame, I can press N to open up this. And I'm going to rename this to Ocean Material. Ocean Material. And then I can also press Control C and then move my mouse over this and press Control V. And that way it says Ocean Material. All right, now if we Control Shift and click on this, we need to convert this to normal data because that looks really weird. So let's just press Shift A. I'm going to search for a bump node and we'll drop that in there. And then again, this needs to go up to the height so that it converts to normal data. And then the strength, I want this to be very, very small. So I'm going to turn the strength to something like a 0.01. And that way, if you zoom way in here, you can definitely see it, but it is very subtle. All right, now we could just take this base color and make it like a blue color for the ocean, but what I want to do is I want to make it so that where the beaches are, that's a bit of a lighter blue, kind of like the water is a bit lighter, and then it gets darker as it goes farther and farther out into the middle of the ocean. So to do that, we already have a mask. If I Control Shift and click on this, you can see that there already is a mask for this, because we have this land right here. If I Control Shift and click on this noise texture, we can use this one and plug it up. So let's just take the noise texture here from the land and we're going to put that into the base color, the color. So we're taking it from the land material and we're putting it into the ocean material. Now if we Control Shift and click on this, that looks terrible. So we need to press Shift A and we need to search for a color ramp. We'll just drop the color ramp in here because we have this color ramp right here and this is making it very contrasty. So we want to do the same thing, but we don't want to make it too contrasty because we still want to be able to see the beaches a little bit. So if I just Control Shift and click on this, we want to drag these out, very similar to what we've done here. So I'm just going to drag these out something like that. If you wanted to, you could also like Shift D this and then we need to press Alt P to get it out of this one. And then we can just drop it into this one. And then we can just click on this and press X to delete it. And then we'll just plug this up. And that way we've already got this almost, but then we can just kind of pull these out a little bit. And let's just Control Shift and click on it so that we can see it. So now we can actually make the colors. So this black one here, I want this one to be a very dark blue because this is going to be the middle of the ocean. So just something like that, a very dark blue. Now this one, I want this to be like where the beaches are, and then it's going to be covered up by the land. So I will take this white color, and I'm going to make it a nice light blue. All right, there we go. So now we have our little beaches, and I think I might bring these together just a little bit to sharpen them up a little bit. We don't want them too sharp, but we do want them pretty sharp. All right, so we can Control and Shift and click back on the principle to preview that. Now water is very shiny, and so this roughness, I want to turn this way down to make it more shiny. And I think I'll turn this down to something like a 0.04, just so that it's very, very shiny. All right, so now we can mix these two shaders up. So I'm going to press Shift A here, and I'm going to search for a mix shader. We're just going to drop the mix shader right here. And then I want to take this principled and this principled. So this is the land and this is the water, and I want to mix them together. So I want to both plug them into this mix shader. Now you can click and drag and plug them up, but because this is kind of far away, what you can also do is you can hold on the Alt key and right click. And you can see that it's going to give a little bit of a preview. And I'm going to go right over this one and then let go. And then also this one is pretty close, so I'll just drag and drop it in. And then I do want to switch these, so I'll just switch that. Now I can Control Shift and click on this, and you can see that right now it's evenly blending these together because there's this factor here, and this is not what we want. We want over here to be the water and then here to be the land. So what do we do to fix this? Well, we already have the mask of where the land is and where the water is, and it's right here, this one right here. So we can take this color and we're going to plug it up to the factor on the mix shader. So now if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see, there we go. Now this needs to be flipped, so let's just actually take these and flip them back. So now you can see that there is the land where the land's supposed to be and the water, the rest of it. Now the beaches here, they're pretty strong. There's a lot of that light blue and I don't really want that much. So you can just play around with these. So if I just drag this a lot closer and even drag this back a little bit to make it more subtle, because I don't want it to be too strong, just on the edges there, that looks pretty good. All right, so now let's go ahead and make the mountains, and then we'll add the mountains into the color. So I'm going to press Shift A here, and I'm going to search for another frame. We're just going to drop this frame right here, just behind the ocean material. And then if I press N, I can rename this. So I'm just going to name it to mountains, and then Control C, and Control V there so that they both say mountains. And then once again, I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a noise texture. They work really well. And I'm going to add this into the mountains. And then you can press Shift A and add a texture coordinate. We'll just drop that in there and plug the object up to the vector. So let's just Control and Shift and click on the noise texture to preview it. Now the scale here, I'm going to turn this up to like a 6. The detail, I'll turn this all the way up to 16 so that there's lots of detail. And I think I'll turn the roughness down a little bit because I don't want it to be too rough, so I'll just turn this down slightly. And then I actually want to add quite a bit of distortion because I want to make there look like there's little mountain ranges, and turning up the distortion will help to do that. So the distortion, I'm going to turn this up to like a 5.9. So you can see there's actually a lot of distortion, but it'll look good. These will kind of look like different mountain ranges going along the distorted parts. Now again, I need to add a color ramp to tell it where I want the mountains to be and where I want it not to be. So I'll press Shift A, add a color ramp. We're just going to drop the color ramp into the mountains. Oh, and that was the wrong place. Let's press Control Z to undo that. I'm just going to drop it into this frame and then we'll plug it up right after the noise texture. All right, so I'm going to drag these both out and start to bring them into each other. So it's very, very contrasty. And you can see the look I'm trying to get. So the white is where there's not going to be any mountains. And then just these little parts here, that's where there's going to be these little mountain ranges and little mountains all along the earth. Now you can see right in here, there's not really very much detail. There is a bit of detail, but I want to add more detail within the mountains so that they just have more detail. So I'm going to click on this noise texture, shift click on the texture coordinate, and we'll press Shift D and bring them down. And then the scale here, if I just Control Shift and click on this, the scale, I want to change this to like 122, something like that, so it's very detailed. And then on this one, I only want to turn the distortion to like a 0.1 because I don't want it to be very distorted, just a little bit. And then this roughness, I think I'll actually turn this up a little bit, maybe to like a 0.6, so it has more detail. That wasn't right, 0.6, there we go. So again, I need to add another color ramp to just make it a little bit more contrasty, so I'll press Shift A. We'll add a color ramp, just drop it right in here. And then I just want to pull these values out to make it a lot darker. So that's actually a little bit too much. If I just drag it back a little bit, just something like that. And I can just bring these mountains back a little bit, maybe bring the ocean material forward a little bit so we have a little bit more room. So now what I want to do is I want to mix these two together because I want this to be where the mountains are, but then I want this to give the mountains more detail. So where the mountains are, there's going to be these details. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a mix RGB. We'll just drop it right here and bring it out. And then I can just plug these both up. So this one and this one, both of these color ramps. But then what I actually want to do is, because this is where I want the mountains to be, instead of plugging this into one of the colors, I'm actually going to plug it into the factor. And then if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see it. Color 2, I want to turn this all the way down, and then this one here, all the little bits of detail, I want to plug this into color 1. So now if you zoom in here, you can see there's lots of little bits of detail on the mountains. It kind of looks like maybe there's like a peak here, and then there's like, some snow that's coming down. Just gives it a lot of detail. All right, so let's just zoom out here. So this is getting a little bit complex, but I will try to go very slowly. So this mountain's right here. The white parts, that's kind of like where the snow is. I want that to be bumping out because the mountains are coming up, but then I also want that to be contributing to the color. So if I Control Shift and click on this, this is our original material for the land, and I don't want the mountains to be on the water, obviously, because mountains wouldn't be on water, they're on land. So instead of just adding it in, I need to mix it into the land, and then the land is going to be mixed with the water. So I'm going to press Shift A right here, and I'm going to search for a mix RGB. We're just going to drop this right here in front of the land. And then I just want to change this to add. And then we just want to mix this color. So this is the regular color. And we want to mix that and add the mountains. So if I go way down here, if I Control Shift and click on this, here's the mountains. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and right click and drag all the way up. And we'll bring it up here. And I don't really know why this is happening. It looks like it's being a little bit glitchy. But if I just let go there, it's going to connect it up. So you may just need to zoom in and connect that up. So now I can Control Shift and click on this. And you can see that it's starting to add the mountains. And because we turned this mix RGB, because we turned it to add, instead of it just evenly mixing it together, it's only adding the white values. So if I drag this all the way down, there's going to be no mountains. And then if I drag this all the way up, there's going to be lots of mountains. So I'm going to turn this up to maybe like a 0.61 because I definitely want there to be the mountains. I want you to be able to see them, but I don't want them to be super, super bright. So just maybe like a 0.61. Okay, and then we can control shift and click on this to preview the final material. So you can see there is these little white bits for the mountains, but they're not being bumped out. So we need to bump them out as well. So what we need to do is we need to take this bump right here, and I'm going to press Shift D and duplicate it and just drop it right in front. And then if I control shift and click on this, here's the mountains down here. We need to take this color, and if I just click on it, we need to drag it and we need to put it into the height of this one. So now if I control shift and click on this one, we are adding this together, and this is going to go into the normal, and then we need to convert this to normal data. So we're going to add it into the height. And you can see now the mountains are all bumping out. Now I don't want the mountains to be bumping out that much. So the strength here, I'm going to turn this to like a 0.25, just so that it's not quite as bumpy. So now we can control shift and click on this, and you can see that where the mountains are, it's being bumped out. So that is really great. All right, and then as you can see right over here, I've just zoomed into some of these mountains. If you press Shift A here, you can search for a color ramp if you want to do this. And if I drop this in here, now you can see. So what I'm doing is I'm dropping this in between the mix of the mountains and the bump that are actually going to make the mountains bump out. So you can see if I start to pull this down a little bit, you can see that the mountains, they're going to be a little bit less big and the actual peaking parts are going to be smaller. If you drag this out, you can see that it's actually going to make the top parts a bit more flat. So if you wanted to do that, if you want to make this more flat, you could do that. Or if you want to make the mountains a little bit smaller, you could just adjust that with this color ramp. I think I will just pull this slightly, and this I'll probably just leave back here. And then one other thing, if you want to adjust the mountains more, this factor here, if you turn this up, there's going to be a little bit more white, and then if you turn this down, there's going to be less white. I think I actually want to turn this all the way to 1 so that that white definitely pops out more. All right, so we can control shift and click on this, and I'll just press control B to preview that. Looking pretty good, and this is starting to get a little bit complex. All right, so I think now is a good time to create the North Pole and the South Pole, and we'll add those into the material as well. So I'm going to press Shift A here, and I'm going to start by adding in a gradient texture. Because what I want to do is I need to tell it that the North Pole is only going to be up here on the top, and the South Pole is only going to be down here. So I'll just start with this gradient texture, and then I will press Shift A. We'll add a texture coordinate, drop that in there. And then I'll take the object and plug that up to the vector. Now I need to press Shift A, and we're going to search for a frame. We'll just drop these both into the frame. And then I can click on this. We'll press N, and I can name this to North and South Poles. All right, Control C and Control V. So it says North and South Poles. So now if I control shift and click on the gradient texture, you can see what it's doing. Now let's just click on the Earth, and I'm going to press Alt R, and that'll clear any rotations that we made. And that way we can make the North Pole and the South Pole. And then I also want to change this to generated. So I'll just plug that in there. And then what I want to do is I want to rotate this up so that this is on the North Pole. So I'm going to press R to rotate, X on the X axis, actually Y on the Y axis, and I'll type in 9, 0, and enter. So there we go, there is the top. Now this gradient texture, it's black, and then it slowly gets more white, and I need it to be very sharp because I need just the North Pole to be right up here. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a color ramp. We're going to drop this right in there. And then I can just start to drag these and make it much sharper. So what I'm going to do is actually turn the black value all the way down, and the white value, I'll turn this way up so that there's only that small little black part right there. So now let's go ahead and actually make the land mass for the North Pole. So I'm going to press Shift A and again search for a noise texture. We're just going to drop this noise texture right here, and then I will just duplicate the texture coordinate and we'll plug the object up to the vector. And then let's just control shift and click on this to preview it. Now the scale, I want to turn this down to like a 1.6, something like that. Then I'll turn the detail all the way up to 16, so we have a lot of detail. And then I think I'll turn the distortion up to just like a 0.1, so it's slightly distorted. And then the roughness, I think I'll turn this up to like a 0.55, just so that it has a little bit more roughness. And then once again, we need to press Shift A and add a color ramp because I want to sharpen this, so I want to tell it where the North Pole is going to be and where it's not. So let's just add this in. And then we can just start to pull these together. until we have a landmass that is a good size. So just something that is the size of the North Pole, something like that. Now, if you don't like the shape here that's on top of this, you can change that. So what you can do is you can press Shift A and you can search for a mapping node, and we're just going to drop the mapping node right here. And then what you can do is you can take this location and just start to play around with this. So just Control Shift and click on this to see the top. And if you can Control Shift and click back on this, you can go to the mapping and you can just play around with the location of the noise. So this is just randomly generating noise. So just play around with it and find a landmass that looks like the North Pole or whatever you want. So just keep playing around with this. I think that one looks pretty good. So I'll try to play around with this. So if I move this on the X, I can kind of pull it over a little bit. Maybe bring that over. There we go on the Z. But then also this is a little bit too big. So to make it smaller, I can go to the RGB curves and I can just start to pull these around and make that a bit more sharp. So there we go. That is a pretty good North Pole. I am happy with that. But because we added this noise texture, it's just adding it all around, and we only want the North Pole to be visible. All this stuff, we just want to make that invisible. So that's where this color ramp comes in. That is where this shader comes in. So what we need to do is we need to mix this together and tell it that we only want to show this where this is. So we'll press Shift A and I'm going to search for another mix RGB. We'll just drop this in here and bring it over. Now I want to actually change this to darken, and then we're just going to take this and plug it up to the factor. So the top one here, that's going to be our factor. And then this one here where the North Pole is, that color is going to go to the top color. And then this color too, we just want to turn this all the way to black. So now if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see what's going on. And so what we need to do to fix this is we actually need to add an invert node, or we could just switch these, but I'm just going to add an invert because we need to switch these colors. So I'll press Shift A. I'm going to search for an invert node, and I'm just going to drop this in here. Now, if it looks good, then that's fine, but let's just add the invert node. You can see this is what I want. So everything is black except the North Pole. Now, if you didn't need this, if that looked fine, then you can just click on this and press Control X, but you can see this is the problem I'm having. So I just need to invert that, and that looks great. So now I can play around with this even more. So I can just play around with this color ramp right here, because I don't really want there to be any other places. You can see like there's some right here. I don't really want that. I just want to be able to see this one in the middle. And then also this is starting to be cut off a little bit. So if you want to go back to the mapping and center this a bit more in the very top, then that can work as well. So I'm just going to play around with this, just move it on the Z-axis, and that is a lot better. Okay, so now it's just on the very top of the world. And then again, if that's a little bit too big, that is a little bit of a big North Pole. You could just like pull this down, drag it down, and make it smaller. Just something like that if you want there to be a smaller North Pole. I think that looks pretty good. So there we go, Control Shift and click on this, and that's what you should see. So now what we need to do is we need to do the same thing for the South Pole. So we're going to use the same thing, but put it down here, and then we'll mix the two together so that you can only see the North and the South Pole. So to make this even easier, something that we could do is we could actually just change this to North Pole. So if you just want to select this, and just name it North Pole, and then you can just copy and paste this value. Now what we can do is we can make a separate one that's South Pole, and then we combine them. So you could do that if you want to. It'll just make things a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to box select this entire thing here. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it and just drag it down. So now here's our desert, here's our North Pole, and our North Pole. Now this one, we actually want this to be the South Pole. So I'm going to click on here to rename it. We're going to call this one South Pole, and then Control C and Control V just to paste that. So here's our South Pole and here's our North Pole. So now we just need to play around with this and change it so that it's at the bottom instead of at the top. So if I Control Shift and click on this color ramp here, we already have a gradient, but we just want to switch it. So it's actually pretty easy to do. We can just take this color ramp and we can flip the colors. And now you can see that we are still using that gradient, but we're just flipping it. So we can just drag this down. And now instead of it being a gradient on the North Pole, it can be a gradient on the South Pole. So really easy just to flip that. And then this white one, we want to pull this out just to sharpen that up. So now let's Control Shift and click on this, and you can see we already have it almost done because we already set it up. Let's just press Control S again to save this. So now what we need to do is we just need to play around with the different land masses until we have a South Pole that we like. So on the mapping here, you can just play around with this. You can also play around with the scale if you want to do that, but the mapping here, the location, that's the easiest way to do it. So just play around with this. It's going to just randomly generate lots of noise, and you can just find a landmass that you like. And also, you can play around with this color ramp if you want to make it a bit bigger or a bit smaller. I think something like this, we could probably use this. So I'm just going to put that in the center. Now it's really small. So if you just play around with this, you can see now it's a lot bigger. So that is cool. We'll just do something like that. If I turn it up too big, you're going to start to see that mask, and I don't want to see that because I want to just make it look like it fades out. Just play around with it and get it just the right size. If you don't want it to be fading out on the edge, you could drag this out and just sharpen that up a little bit more. But you can see when you start to bring it out, it's going to show more and more of the other parts. So you're just going to have to fiddle around with it because it's randomly generated noise and get it to how you like. So we have that. If I just Control Shift and click on the darken, we have that one. And then if we go to the top, you can Control Shift and click on this and we have the North Pole. So now we have a North Pole and a South Pole. Now we just need to combine them together so that there's white where the North Pole and South Pole are, and then black the rest of it. So to combine this together, it's pretty easy to do. We'll just press Shift A. We're going to search for a Mix RGB. Just drop it right in here between both of them. And I want to change this to add, because add can add the two values together. The two white values, it'll add them together, and then the black will just stay the black. So the color, we'll put that in there, and the color, we'll put that in there. Then I can Control Shift and click on this, and now you can see it added them both together. Now, because the North Pole, that's the top one, and it's adding the South Pole is a little bit grayed out. So the factor, we just need to turn this all the way to 1, because we're first taking the North Pole, and then we're adding the South Pole, and then I want to turn that all the way up. So there we go. Now we have the North Pole and the South Pole combined. Now, something that I know we're going to need to do is on the edges here, you can see that it's not very sharp. So I'll just press Shift A, add another color ramp, and we will just drop that in there after the add, after we mix them both together. And you can just start to make that really, really sharp, because I know that it's not going to look very good unless those are super sharp. So you can just do that, and now you can see that it's very, very sharp. And that's what I want. I just want it to be very sharp on those edges. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to mix the North Pole and the South Pole together into the principled. And then I also want to give it a little bit of bump, so we're going to need to plug it into this as well. So I know this is kind of getting complicated, but I'll try to go really slowly, and I'll show you how we are going to attach these. So I want to just move these a little bit back. So I'll just press A to deselect everything, just box select these, and then I'll press G to grab and kind of bring them back just a little bit, just so that we can kind of plug them right down here. So now what I'm going to do is, just like we've been using all these mixes to add things together and add more and more layers, we need to add another layer, which is the North and South Pole. So I'm going to press Shift A. We're going to search for another Mix RGB. We'll just drop the Mix RGB right here. All right, and then way up here, we need to take this, and you can hold down the Alt key and right click if that's easier. And I don't know why it's doing this. This seems like a glitch, but I'm going to let go. And there we go. And then I want to change this to add, because I just want to add the white values. So I'll change this to add, and then just go up here, go up onto the top of the world or the bottom, whichever one you want to do, so that we can preview that. And then I'll also Control Shift and click on the add. So if you look on the top here, you can see that now we're just adding the North Pole and the South Pole on top of the land, and that is what we want. Now you can see that you can start to see a little bit through the North Pole and South Pole, so we just need to turn this factor all the way up to 1 so that you can't see through it. All right, now we can Control Shift and click on this, and you can see that it kind of disappeared, and this is because if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see here is the land. And because we mixed the ocean material and we mixed the land together, you're not going to be able to see the North and South Pole on the water, because the water is covering over the top of it. So what we need to do is we need to use this as a mask to put this on top of the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add another Mix RGB. We're just going to drop this down here. Now I'm going to change this to add, because what we want to do, if I just change this to add, we want to add this land mask right here, and then we also want to add it with the North and South Pole. So we want to add these two together. So we're going to take this color, drop it in this one, and then right up here on the North and South Pole, take the color, and we're going to drop it right down here. So if you Control Shift and click on this, now I'm going to turn the factor all the way up to 1. You can see that now we have the North and South Pole as well as the land. Now the North Pole, because it's ice, I want to make it just a very, very slight blue tint. So right here on this color ramp, this is going to be right in front of the North Pole and the South Pole. I want to click on this white one and just make it very, very slightly blue. So it's really subtle, but I think it will help to make it look more icy. Okay, so now we can Control Shift and click on this add, and you can see that the land is white, and then this is going to be just a little bit blue. So now back over here, instead of this being our factor, you can see there's the factor on the mix shader, and right now the factor is this. We want this one to be the factor because this one includes the North and South Pole. So we're just going to take this and we're just going to drop it in here in our factor to replace that. And there you go. Now you can see that the North Pole and South Pole are on the Earth and the water isn't getting in the way. Now it's on top of the Earth. Now we also want this to be going into our bump because I do want the North and South Pole to bump out a little bit. So on the land material, this bump right here, we're going to press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it right here. And then we can just Control Shift and click on this. And this one, that's the factor that I'm going to use to tell it where it's going to be bumpy. So we're going to click on this and we're going to bring it all the way down here. You can also hold down the Alt key and right click if you want to do it that way. That might be a little bit easier. And then I can Control Shift and click on this. So now we're adding all of these together. There's now 4 bumps, but that's going to add a lot of detail. And I think I'll change the strength of this one to something like a 0.4. So now if I Control Shift and click on the principled on the land material, you can see that it looks like it's bumping out even more. And then if I Control Shift and click on the final mix shader, there we go. Very nice. And then also, if you find that this North Pole and South Pole, if it's like really bright, it kind of looks like it's blown out, you could just turn this down a little bit. Just don't turn it down too much, but just a tiny bit. And that'll just give it a little bit more texture there, just because it did seem slightly blown out. All right, now over here on our mountains, if you just zoom in here, you can see that there are mountains on our North and South Pole. Now you could keep that if you wanted to, but I actually don't want to be able to see the mountains on the North and South Pole. So to do this, I need to go ahead and edit the mountains. So you can see if I just Control Shift and click on the mix, before this goes up to the add, I need to tell it to not be displayed where the North and South Pole is. So I need to go ahead and edit that. So what I need to do is add this mask in there before it goes into here. And then also this one goes into the bump. It's not that bump, it's this bump right here. So this bump right here, this one adds the mountains. So before the mountains goes into this bump, I need to tell it to not have any mountains where the North and South Pole is. So to do that, let's first Control Shift and click on this add. So if I click on this one and then Control Shift and click on this one, you can see this add is going to add the mountains. So we just need to edit this in here and add a mask. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift D and duplicate this add. We're just going to stick it right here. And then instead of it being add, I want to turn this back to mix. So now what we need to do is we just need to go way up here and take this color ramp. This one is the masks for the North Pole and South Pole. And I need to drag it all the way down, and we need to stick it into this mix here, into the factor, because this mix is telling it where the mountains are going to be. And you can see that right now it's just adding that on. It's almost adding it like a mountain, almost as if the North and South Pole are mountains, because it's just adding it with the mountains. But we want all the mountains right here to go away. So what we're going to do is take this color and turn it all the way down. So if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see it's sort of working, but the mountains are just a little bit less visible. You can see here they're kind of lighter, and then where the North Pole is, they're darker. And that's because we need to actually edit this mask before it goes in here. So I need to press Shift A. We're going to add a color ramp, and this color ramp is going to go right in here between the mix and the original mask, and it just bumped this whole thing over. Let me just kind of drag this back a little bit. So what we need to do is we need to Control Shift and click on this and then drag this way over and make it very, very sharp, because this, you can see here, it's a little bit gray, and it also has that blue color and it's not quite as bright. So I just need to edit this and make it very, very sharp so it's a very strong mask. So this one, I'm just going to pull the white value over, and now this color ramp is going to go into this mix, and now you can't see the mountains at all at the North Pole or the South Pole. And now this is already plugged up, so it's just plugging into the original add that it was before, and you can see now the mountains aren't there. And then it goes through, and it goes through, and we can go all the way to the final mix shader, and now you can't see the mountains. Well, actually you still can, because there's still the bump, but you can't see the color of the mountains, because if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see Right over here, there's no color of the mountains, but there still is the bump. So we need to do the same thing to get rid of it. It's not too hard to do, but let's just go through and do this. So let's just Control Shift and click on these bumps, and I can see that the third one, that is the one that adds the mountains. And if you wanted to make this a little bit easier, you could also just rename these real quick. So if you just click on a bump and press N, you can rename these. So I could call this like mountain bump, if I can just spell that right, mountain bump. And then if I Control Shift and click on this, that is the poles bump. And then if I just Control Shift and click on this one is the land bump. So I can just call this second one land bump. Totally optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it can help out. And then this one is just going to be the noise bump. And to actually be able to see it, you need to rename it on the label. So let me just go through and do that. So I want the noise bump to be in the label, and then the land bump as well to be in the label. So now you can see we have the noise bump, the land bump, the mountain bump, and then this one is the poles bump. So I'll just add that into the label as well. So let's just Control Shift and click on the mountain bump. I'm also going to press N just to close that. So now we just need to do the same thing. So where the North Pole and South Pole are, we need to take that out so there's no mountains there. So this is actually really easy to do. So if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see here is the mountains, and this is just coming from the mix. But instead of using this one, I want to use this mix. So if I Control Shift and click on it, these are both the same thing, except it doesn't have the North Pole. So I can just take this color, put it into the height right there, and then I can just Control Shift and click on this to preview the final thing. And there we go. Now we don't have the mountains, because if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see here originally was the mountain, so there was like a mountain there, but if I Control Shift and click on that, you can see there's no mountains. So this color ramp here, actually there's nothing attached to it anymore, so I'm just going to press X to delete it, because now we're feeding it through this mix instead. All right, let's just press Control S again to save your project. So we're getting there. It's definitely looking pretty cool. There is still a bit to go, but as you can see, we've done a lot of progress. So let's keep going. So I think now would be a great time to go ahead and add the city light. So let's go ahead and do that. So we want the city lights to only be down here where it's dark. And then as we change it, the city lights are going to change so they're only in the dark areas. So let's just take this ocean material, maybe the mountains and the ocean material, and we'll just move them back a little bit. Actually, what you could do is kind of make the mountains right here and then just put the ocean material right there, however you want to do it. Maybe I'll just bring this over so we have a little bit more space. So right in here, I'm just going to create the city lights. So I'll press Shift A. We're just going to add a frame, drop it in there, and then I can just rename this to city lights, and then we'll Control C and Control V that, so that's called city lights. And then you can probably guess what I'm going to use. I'm going to press Shift A and again add a noise texture. We'll just drop that in there, and then we're also going to press Shift A and we're going to add a texture coordinate. We'll drop that in there as well, and again object up to the vector. Now the scale, I want this to be really, really small. So I'm going to change the scale to something like a 785, something like that. And if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see it, because I want the city lights to be very, very detailed. I just want there to be little tiny bits, little tiny dots. I think I'll also turn this detail size up to like a 3. And the roughness, maybe I'll just turn this up to like a 0.7 to give it a little more detail. Okay, now again, I want to add a color ramp to sharpen this up. So I'm going to press Shift A. Search for a color ramp, we'll drop that in there and then put it into the city lights. And then I'm going to drag these together until it's very, very contrasty. And we're going to drag these up very, very close. So when you zoom in, it's very, very contrasty. So just bring these as close as you possibly can together. So we're getting this look right here. So if you zoom way in, you can see that's what it looks like. Now, if we just added this onto the world, this wouldn't make any sense because there would just be like a giant city with tons of lights over the entire thing. So what I want to do is I want to make some little patchy areas, because cities are kind of in groups. So, you know, there's like a bunch of buildings or houses and things. So all these little dots, I only want them to be in certain little groups together. So what we need to do is we need to add a noise texture, and then we need to make the noise texture pretty big so that they're in lumps, and then we will use that as the factor to tell it where the city is actually going to be. So this is the city texture, but then we need to actually tell it where the cities are going to be placed. So I'll just click on the noise texture, shift click on the texture coordinate, and we'll press Shift D, bring them down here. Maybe we can kind of pull this back as well. Now the scale for this one, I want to change this to maybe like a 50. so that's a lot bigger. And let's Control Shift and click on this. And there you can see that noise texture is a lot bigger now. So let's also take this color ramp and we'll press Shift D and drop it down here. And I can Control Shift and click on it. So you can see this is where our cities are going to be. So wherever those white places are, that's where the groups of the cities are going to be. Now I actually want to switch this. I want to switch this so that it's mostly white. So I'm going to just switch this over like that. And this is still way too many cities. There would be like cities all over the place. But I want there to be some, countryside or some other like wildlife and things. So I just want there to be some cities here and there. So I'm going to drag the black back and then drag the white forward. And you can see the more we drag it back, the less city there's going to be. So if you can imagine just this being the land, there's cities here and there, but there's not too many. But if you want there to be more cities, you could drag it over to the other side. Yeah, I think something like that is pretty good. Maybe just slightly less cities. And there we go. I like how that is. So we just have some little bits of cities here and there. And I think I might take the scale and turn it down, maybe to like a 30. That might look just a little bit better. Maybe a 40, because I don't want the cities to be quite that small. That is pretty good. So now we need to combine these together. So again, we're going to press Shift A and use a Mix RGB. Let's just add the Mix RGB right in here. We're going to use this bottom one here as the factor because this is where the cities are going to be. So this one here, the bottom one, that's going to be the factor. And then the top one here, that's going to go into color 1. And then we want color 2 to be black. So if I Control Shift and click on this now, you can see there's only some cities here and there. Everything's black, but then there's just some little cities. But then if you zoom way in, you can see those cities have details. Like there's little houses and, buildings and things. So it gives it some noise. So instead of just having this, those cities would look kind of lumpy and weird. The cities inside the cities, they have all this little detail in there. So that is exactly what we want. All right, now these city lights, right now, if you zoom in, they're just white, and I want to have them slightly yellow because looking at images from space from like the ISS or something, usually in the photos, it looks like the cities have a very slight yellow color. So let's just press Shift A. We're going to search for another color ramp. Color ramps are so awesome. We're going to drop that in there and put it in the city lights. And then we can just turn this white color to a slight yellow. So now if you zoom in here, it does need to be kind of subtle, but something like that so that they look a bit yellow. And then these city lights are their own material. So we need to add a material and they are going to be glowing because we want them to glow at night. So for a material, instead of using like a principled, we need to press Shift A and we're going to add an emission. So let's just drop the emission right in here and we'll connect that up. And then you can Control Shift and click on that and preview that. So now those city lights are actually going to be emitting light. And I do want them to be stronger because right now the strength is only 1. I find that if you change the strength to like 10, that looks better. So you can see it's getting rid of a lot of our yellow, but it'll still be yellow along the edges, which will look really nice. You could make this just slightly more yellow if you wanted to, but I think from far away it looks pretty good. All right, so there's our city lights. Just press Control S again to save. So now we need to combine these city lights on top of everything. But of course, we don't want the city lights to be on the water and we don't want the city lights to be on the North Pole, but we want to combine it with the land. And we also only want to see the city lights in the shadows, so I'll show you how to do that as well. So I'm actually going to go back to the layout here because I'm going to set up the system so that the lights only show from the shadow and don't show on the light, just show where it's nighttime. So I'm going to go back to the layout here and let's just press Z and move out to go back into the solid view. So what I'm first going to do is just press Shift C to make sure the 3D cursor is in the very center. And then I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to go right down here to empty and I'm going to add a plane axis. You could add whichever one you want, but I'm going to add a plane axis. I'll now scale this up just so that I can see it coming out of the sides. And then what I want to do is I want to parent it to the Earth. So when I rotate the Earth, then the empty is going to move along with it. So I'm going to click on the empty and then Shift click on the Earth and I'll press Control P and then I'm going to set parent to object. All right, so now I need to add some object constraints to get this to work. I'm going to click on the sun lamp as well and just bring this into the center. So that is in the very center, just pointing right at the Earth and going right through the Earth. So I'll click back on the empty and then let's add those object constraints to get this to work. And then we'll also do a little bit of node setup as well to get this to work. So I'm going to click on this, go to the object constraints. I'm going to click on add object constraint and I'm going to click on the track to. Now what I want to do is I actually want to track this to this object here, which is the sun. So I'm going to click on this and you can see there's some different things here. Let's actually rename these so they're a little bit easier to use. So this one right here, I'm going to leave this as empty, and because it's parented, you can't see it in here because it's right there. So that's empty. That is fine. I'm going to click on this one and I'm going to call this Earth. So in the outliner here, you can just double click on it and call it Earth. And then also right here, this light here, I'm going to double click on this and call it Sun. All right, so let's click back on this. So I actually want to parent this to the sun. So I'm going to click on Sun. And then I also want to make sure this track axis, that's on -z. And then I want the up to be on X. So now you can see that when I did that, it actually rotated this over. So now when I move this, the empty is going to be moved. Now, this may not make too much sense right now, but I will explain it a little bit better when we're doing the nodes, because basically we're going to use this to create a gradient. And then as this moves, as the object moves, we're going to make the object coordinates of this object to move the gradient. And that way, when we move the sun, the gradient's going to move. Now, as well as this object having a constraint, I want the sun to rotate as I grab it. So that way the sun is always pointed at this object, because right now if I rotate this over, you could see that the sun is still pointing this way, but then it would have the lights over here, so I'd need to rotate the sun over. So I just want to have it automatically rotate as I move this. So with the sun selected, I'm going to click on add object constraint and I'm going to add a track to, and then the target here, I want to track this to the Earth. And then I also want to set the up to the X value and then the track axes to -z. So now if I press G to grab, you can see that as this is moving, the sun is always going to be pointed at the Earth because I'm tracking it to the Earth. And that is exactly what we want. So then it's always going to be daylight. When I move it, it's always going to be pointing in the right direction. All right, so that is that. Let's press Ctrl S to save, and I'm going to go back to the shading tab and then click on the world, and then we can set this up. So we're going to be setting this up with the city lights. So just go to the city lights, and I'm first going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a texture coordinate. So I'm just going to drop the texture coordinate in here and just kind of bring it down. And if you just go into the rendered view and then Control Shift and click on this and keep clicking down, or just click on this one, we want to click on the object one. And you can see it doesn't really look like it right now, but if I just Control Shift and click on this object one, you can see that it's actually making this right here. And these are the object coordinates, and we're going to use this as our gradient. Now, to actually make this a gradient, we need to separate the X, the Y, and the Z coordinates, because right now there's the X, Y, and Z. It may not make too much sense, but let me just show you. If you press Shift A and you search for a separate, we want to separate X, Y, and Z, because right now these object coordinates, they have the X values, the Y values, and the Z values, but to make a gradient, we only want to use one of those values. So we're going to drop the separate X, Y, Z right in here. And now you can see if you Control and Shift and click through these, there are gradients. So there's an X gradient, a Y one, and a Z one. And this is actually using the object coordinates. Now, we don't want to use the Earth's object coordinates. We want to use the empty's object coordinates, because when the sun rotates, it's going to need to change where the gradient is. And so because when the sun moves, also the empty moves, that way when we move the sun, the gradient is going to move. So what we need to do is we need to take this object here, and instead of it just being the default object, we need to change this to empty. So you can see now when I rotate the sun, look at that. It is switched. The black is here and the white is here, but that is okay. But you can see when we move this, it's actually going to tell it where the light is going to be and where the shadows are going to be. So that is exactly what we want. Let's click back on the world here. So we just want to use the Z one because the X and the Y, that's the opposite. Y is like over this way, and then X is like back and forth this way. We want to use the Z one so that it's up and down and it's going the opposite of the sun. Now it's kind of gray here, and I want to sharpen that up to make it very sharp so that when you're in the sunlight, there is no lights at all. And then when you're in the darkness or in the shadows, there's going to be lots of lights. So let's just press Shift A, and I'm going to add a color ramp to do this. So I'll just drop a color ramp right here. And then this white value, I'm just going to pull this way out so it's very close. Now I don't want to do it all the way because I do want a small gradient, kind of like when it's evening time, but I do want it to be all the way white here and all the way black here and just a small gradient. So I'm just going to drag this pretty close, but not too close. All right, now we actually need to drag the emission forward and drag the color ramp forward because we're going to need to add this data in right here before the color ramp. So what we need to do is we need to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a math node. We're going to drop the math node right in here, and then Right now it's set to add. I want to change this to multiply. So if I control shift and click on this one, here's all of our city lights, and our city lights are going all over the world. And then if I control shift and click on this, this is the gradient where we want it to be and where we don't want it to be. So what we can do is take this color and we can put it in the bottom one. And then this mix right here, this one needs to be in the top one. So now if you control shift and click on this, here's the sun. And if you zoom way in, you can see that there's no lights here, no city lights, but then the city lights are down here. So if I just control shift and click on that to the emission, there you can see it really well. So there are no lights here and there's just lights down here. All right, so now we actually need to combine the city lights onto the material, but I don't want the city lights to be in the water. I just want them to be on the land. So what I'm going to do is just click on this mix shader and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and bring it down here. Now this emission, this is the city lights. I'm going to plug that up right there. And then I need to combine that with the ground, which is right here. So I'm going to take the principled and also plug that up. Now I can control Shift and click on this and you can see that there are the lights and they're on top of the land. But you can see that it's kind of just blending them together, and this factor here, it's just kind of evenly blending them. So what I want to do is I want to take this multiply, because this is a good map because it has the bright and dark values, and I want to use this as the factor. So I'm going to plug the multiply as the factor into this mix shader. Now if we control shift and click on it, you can see that there are the city lights and then there is the land. I'm just going to bring these mix shaders back a little bit so we have a little bit more room, and I'll control shift and click on this. So now instead of using this principle right here, this doesn't have the city lights, we want to use this one instead, because this one is the same exact thing, this mix shader, it's the same exact thing as this one, but without the city lights. So we just want to replace this and feed it into our final thing. So this one's going right down here into the bottom one, so we just want to replace it for this one. So now there's the city lights, that's being combined with this one, which is the land material, that's being combined, and then we're plugging that in here, which is then combining them with the water. And there we go. So now if you look around here, you can see that there are lights, but the lights are only on the land and they're not on the water. And then they're also not here on the daytime. If you look really close, you can't see the lights at all. You can only see them on the land and only in the darkness. But there is one problem. You can see that the lights are still on the north and south pole, so we just need to take it out of the north and south pole. So right down here on these city lights, right in here, we just need to add a mix node. So I'm going to press Shift A, add a mix RGB, drop it in there, and then we just need to use the north and south pole and plug that in and tell it to remove the lights where the north and south pole are. So this one I'm going to turn all the way to black because I want color 2 to be black. And then we're using this multiply, plugging that into the color. And now we just need a factor. So I'm going to go up here over to the north and south pole. And I'm going to take this color and I want to put this all the way down here into this mix. So this color right here, you can see the north and south pole. It's this one right here, the really sharp one. And I think I actually will just turn this to constant to make it even more sharp. Yeah, that is better. I need to turn that to constant. So I'm going to take this one, the mask here of where the north and south pole is, and we need to hold in the Alt key, right click, or just drag down, and I'm going to plug it into that one. So there we go. And then we don't want to plug it into color 2. We want it to be the factor. So now if I control shift and click on this, you can see now the north and south pole doesn't have any light. So we can preview the final material, and there we go. It's in darkness. Now, something that I noticed is that there are a lot of lights, and I think I want there to be a few less lights. So let's just go ahead and change that. I'm going to press Ctrl S again to save my project. But yeah, that's a lot of cities, and I don't quite want there to be that many cities. So on the city lights at the very starting, we need to play around with these noise textures and color ramps to make there be less cities. So if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see here is where we made the cities. So on this color ramp, you can just start to drag this down and drag it a bit more towards the left to get away cities if you want there to be less cities. Something like that. Really just play around with it. You can always go back to this if you want, but I need it to mostly be the white. Okay, that looks better. Let's go back up here and Control Shift and click on this. I think that looks pretty good, so I'm going to keep it just like that. Let's just press Control S again to save this, and let's keep going. All right, so let's go ahead and do the clouds now. So I'm just going to zoom in kind of right over here. I'm going to make the clouds right here. We're going to be making 2 different types of clouds, and then we will add them in. So I'm going to press Shift A, add a frame, just like when we start the other parts. And then let's just press N here. I'm going to call this one Puffy Clouds. because we're going to be making two different types of clouds. One is going to be puffy, and then one is going to be a bit more wispy. So clouds, puffy clouds, we'll just add that into the label. I'm going to press Shift A, and as usual, we'll add a noise texture, and then I will press Shift A and add a texture coordinate. We'll just drop this right in here and plug the object up to the vector. Now let's Control Shift and click on this to preview it. I'm going to turn the detail all the way up to 16, so it's very detailed, and then the scale, I'll just turn this up to about a 6. And I think I'll turn the roughness up a little bit to something like a 0.6 or 0.65. Gives it a little bit more detail. I think I'll turn this up to a 0.65, so there's a little bit more detail in there. And then the distortion, it looks kind of nice at 0.1, so I'll just do that. Just gives it a little bit of distortion. All right, now I want there to be clouds in only some areas. I just want to make some puffy clouds. So I need to just make some areas where there are clouds and where there aren't. So let's just press Shift A and add a color ramp. We're just going to drop the color ramp in here into the puffy clouds, and then I can start to drag these together just so that some areas there are clouds and some areas there aren't. All right, something like that. I think that's pretty good. Now I want to mix this with some more noise, and then we'll add them together just because I find it makes it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. We're just going to add this in here. Oh, I don't want to add it in right here, so I'm going to press Control X to get rid of it. Let's just plug the factor back up here. Shift A, add a Voronoi. I just want to add the Voronoi in the puffy clouds underneath here. And then I want to duplicate the texture coordinate and the noise texture. So we're just going to duplicate that and drop it in here. And then I'll plug the factor up to the vector on the Voronoi texture. Let's just Control Shift and click on the Voronoi texture to see what it's doing. Now I think for this one, I think I'll change the scale down to like a 5. So it's a little bit smaller. And I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.72. And then instead of using the factor, I actually want to use the color. And that way it's a bit darker. So now I want to mix these two together to give a cool result. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a mix RGB. We'll drop that inside there, and then we'll put it inside the puffy clouds. And then I'm going to use this as the factor. We'll just put that in there because if I Control Shift and click on this, I don't want there to be clouds all over the place, just a little bit around the Earth. So I'm going to have that as the factor, and then we'll turn this way down. Because without this, you can see that it's kind of bland, but then once you add in this texture here, just plug the distance into color 1, you can see it just adds a lot more noise in there and looks really nice. All right, so there's our clouds over our world. Now, those are the puffy clouds, but I also want to make some like wispy clouds, kind of like some wind patterns around the Earth. So right down here, I'm just going to bring the puffy clouds up, and then I'm going to make some other clouds right down here. So I'll press Shift A, we're going to add a frame. This frame, I'm just going to call windy clouds. So just click on this frame. You can press N to open this panel and then go to the item, windy clouds for the label. I'll press Shift A and I'm going to add a noise texture. We'll just add this in there. And then again, I'm going to add a texture coordinate. We'll just put that in there. And again, object up to the vector. So I'm doing a very similar thing. I want to have a noise texture with a color ramp just to show where I want the clouds to be. And then I'll have another noise texture, and that will actually be the texture for the clouds. So right down here, let's press Shift A. I'm going to add a color ramp. We'll just drop that in there. And then the factor will plug up to the factor of the color ramp. And then I will just drag these two together. Let's Control Shift and click on this so we can see it. Just drag these together, and it's not very detailed, so let's add some detail in here to this noise texture. So the scale I'll change to something like a 6.7, and then the detail all the way up to 16 so that there's lots of detail. I do like there to be a little bit of distortion, so maybe I'll change this up to like a 0.5. All right, and then let's play around with this because I do want it to be a bit darker. So something like that. All right, and then let's just click on the texture coordinate and shift click on the noise texture. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we will just bring it down. Now this one, to make the clouds really wispy and windy, we can play around with the distortion, and that's really going to give that effect. So the distortion, I'm going to change this pretty high to like a 9.6, and you can see that now it has that really cool look. And the scale, I'll also turn this down to like 2 because it's too big right now, so that's better. And then let's just take this color ramp and press Shift D and duplicate it and bring it down. And I want to bring it down just a little bit. I'll bring it more to this side. And then we need to mix those together. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a mix RGB. We're just going to drop the mix RGB right in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to multiply. Then I can take this color and I'm going to put it in the bottom one and then have this one in the top. So now we need to mix these two textures together. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a mix RGB. Now this one I'm going to do a little bit differently to get a different result. So this one, I'm going to change this to multiply, and then I'm going to take this top one right here and I'm going to put this into color 2, and then this one right here I'll put into color 1. So we can control shift and click on this, and the factor, I also want this to be all the way up to 1, so it's adding both of them together. Now I need to play around with the color ramp because this isn't quite the result that I want. I want it to be a lot darker. So I'm just going to bring these over a little bit, and also I think of this one I'll bring over a little bit as well. Okay, that's definitely looking better because there is more black, but I want to give it a more wispy effect and more detail. So this bottom one here, if you turn the roughness up, that really helps. You can really notice now that is a lot better. You can see it gives all those little cracks in there, and that looks really nice. I think I'll turn this up even more to like a 0.87. Yeah, there we go. So there's a lot of that detail in there. All right, so now we have these two clouds. We have the windy clouds and the puffy clouds, and I just want to mix them together. So I will press Shift A. We're going to search for a mix RGB. We'll just plug this in here, kind of bring this up. And I want this one to be an add. So we'll turn on add, and then we will just mix these both together. So I want this one to be on the top one, and then that one to be on the bottom one. And then the factor, we'll turn that all the way to 1. So it's mixing the two clouds together. All right, so we have our factor. We have where we want the clouds to be, but we actually don't have a cloud material yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to create a cloud material down here, and then we'll mix them together. So right down here, we're going to press Shift A. I'm going to search for another frame. Let's also press Control S to save this. Now press N, and we're going to name this to cloud material. And then for this cloud material, I'm going to press Shift A and search for a principled BSDF. We'll drop that right in there. And then the clouds are puffy, and so they're kind of bumpy. And so I want to add a noise texture and put that into the cloud material to make it kind of bumpy. So I'm going to press Shift A. We're going to add a noise texture. Just drop that in there. And then I can press Shift A. We'll add another texture coordinate, drop that in as well, and put the object up to the vector. Now, if I Control Shift and click on this, we can take a look. The scale, I'm going to change this to something like a 45, and that way it has a lot more detail. And then I'll also turn the detail here up to 16. Now to distortion, again, I think just adding like 0.1 looks pretty nice, and I'll turn the roughness up a little bit too. All right, now we can plug the factor into the normal, but again, we need to convert this to normal data. So I'll press Shift A, we're going to add a bump, and I'll plug the bump in here. And then because this is a gray factor, it needs to be going into the height, and then it will convert it to normal data, and then the purple normal can go into the normal. So you can see how that's looking, and it's way too strong. So I'm going to turn the strength down to like a 0.15, so it's less strong. And then let's just Control Shift and click on the final material. And I'm just going to leave the base colors white because clouds are usually pretty white. All right, so now we can actually mix this together. So I'm going to take this mix shader, press Shift D to duplicate it. We're going to drop it in here. So we want to take our other materials that we already have, and we want to put the clouds on top of that. So we'll take this shader and we're going to put it onto the top one, and then we want to mix that with the cloud material. So the cloud material is right here. We're going to plug that into the bottom one, and then we can Control Shift and click on this. Now, right now, Blender is just blending them together. So we have a completely cloud world or just a world with no clouds. So what we want to do is right up here, this factor that we made, we want to use this to tell it where the clouds are going to be and where the rest of it's going to be. So the color, we're going to put that into the factor, and then I can Control Shift and click on this and check it out. So now we have these nice clouds on our world. It looks pretty nice. All right, look at this. This is getting really, really big. We are getting towards the end. We still have a few things to do, but we are really getting there. So let's go ahead and add an atmosphere now. So this is pretty easy to do. And as you may have noticed, I'm layering things up in the order which you'd see them. So, you would see the land and the water, then you would see the clouds on top of that, and then even on top of that, you would see the atmosphere. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the atmosphere after all of this, so over here. So the atmosphere is pretty easy to do. I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to use a layer weight node. So we'll just add this in here. If you Control Shift and click on it, so basically what the layer weight node does is it's lighter on the edges, and when it gets more sideways, when you're looking more sideways on the object, it's going to be lighter, and then when you're looking at it on the front here, it's just going to be gray. I'm also going to press Shift A, and we're just going to add a frame, and I can just put this in here, and then we can just click on the frame, and then we can call this atmosphere. Control C, Control V. Okay, there's our atmosphere. And then we need to combine this with a mix shader. So I'm going to click on this mix shader, press Shift D and drop it into the atmosphere. We'll just bring it over here. bring it in front, and we can control shift and click on this mix shader. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this layer weight, and we're going to use it as the factor to tell it where the atmosphere is going to be. So this Fresnel, we're going to plug that into the factor. And then we want to add this all in with all the other stuff. So this mix shader, we're going to plug to the top shader. And then all we need to do is we need to make a shader down here and plug that in for the atmosphere. So I'm going to press Shift A. We're going to add another principled BSDF. We'll just drop that. Not there. Let's plug this back here. We want this to just be underneath this. So let's just unplug this. And then what I'm going to do is take this base color and we're going to make it a very bright blue color. So nice and bright and saturated. And then we can just plug this up to the shader right here. Now, if I control shift and click on this to preview the final thing, you can see that it is adding an atmosphere, but the problem with it is that it's kind of just over the entire thing. And I mainly want it to be on the edges. And that's because this is kind of gray. So we need to make it sharper. So we're going to do the same thing that we have always been doing, adding a color ramp to define that and make it more contrasty. So we'll add a color ramp right in here and we'll drop it between the Fresnel and the factor. So now what we can do is we can drag this out and we can make it more and more contrasty. And immediately you can see that now, you can see that on the edges here, there's a lot of that atmosphere, but then in the inside, there's barely any atmosphere. So if I just control shift and click on this, we can see exactly what it's doing. And I want there to be a lot of atmosphere, so I'm just going to bring this one here, and then this one I'm just going to drag way out and just make it a lot closer so that it's very light right there. So wherever it's white, that's going to be the atmosphere. Wherever it's black, you're not going to be able to see the atmosphere. So there we go. Now you can see it gives this really nice shader right here, really cool. So in the center, you can't really see it, but then on the edges, you can see that really bright, especially when the light is hitting on that. All right, and there we go. So the world material is finally complete. Now there is just one other thing that I want to do so that when we render this out, this looks really cool. I just want to add some stars in the background. So this is pretty easy to do. Let's just go back out to the layout here. I'm going to press Ctrl S again to save this. I'll just press Shift A and I'm going to add a plane. I'll just press G, click with my middle mouse, we move it back here, and then I'll press R to rotate. Y on the Y axis, and I'll type in 9, 0, and enter, so that it's pointed like that, just behind the world. I can now scale this up so that it is behind the camera, and then if we go back into the shading tab, we can just create a simple stars background. So this stars background is super easy. I'm just going to click on new here and call it stars. Okay, let's just zoom in here. So we don't want to use a principled because I want it to be an emission, so I'm just going to delete this and press Shift A. And we'll search for an emission, and then I'll just drop the emission right down here into the surface. And then I want to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a Voronoi texture. Just drop that right there. And then I can press Ctrl T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I can plug the distance up to the color, and you can start to see what's happening. So if I just kind of look out here, it's basically adding these little dots in here, and we can use that for the stars. I also want to change the scale because the stars are too big. So I'm going to change this up to something like a 30 so that there are a lot more stars. Now we need to press Shift A and we need to search for a color ramp, and we'll drop the color ramp right in here before it goes into the emission. And then if I Control Shift and click on this, you can see what it's doing. So we just want to bring these in, and I actually need to flip these. So you can see now that we've flipped these and we can just make it really, really small. Now there's just all these little white stars. And I want to bring these really close to each other because I do want the stars to be pretty small. So just change it to the size that you like. Just something like that is pretty good. I think I'll just make the scale even bigger, maybe like a 40, so there's more stars. And there we go. So check it out. Here we go. So we have this completely procedural planet. And if you look right here on the top, you can see that there is a North Pole and a South Pole, and there is all of these clouds here, and then there's also like the different bits of land and the ocean, and then as well as that we added like the little blue parts near the beaches. And you can also see that we have those little city lights right there, so these city lights are popping up, but they're not on the North and South Pole. And then when I press G to grab this and move the sun around, you can see that the city lights actually adapt. So that is super, super cool. One last thing that you could do really quick before we finish this off, you can see that the light here, it's very bright. It has a big circle. If you click on the sunlight and go to the angle, if you turn this all the way to 0, now that light there, it still is there, but it's very, very tiny. So I like doing that. And then there were just two quick things that I forgot to add in the tutorial. So when I go into rendered mode, if I just go into rendered mode here, you can see that that little dot right there, that little bright light, that is the sunlight being reflected. There is actually a way to turn this off if you don't want to see that. So what you do is you select the sunlight, and then what you're going to do is you're going to click on the object properties. Then down here on visibility, you can see that there's this ray visibility. So if you click on glossy, you can see that now it's still going to light up the scene, but you're not going to have that little glare there. So if you want to get rid of that, you can do that. It's really easy to do. And then of course, if you want to rotate the earth, you can press R to rotate, G to grab, just select the earth and rotate it. I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis, and it's really easy. You can move it all around. So if you want to look at different parts of the earth, that's really easy to do. And if you wanted to animate this earth, you could just rotate it, add some keyframes and animate this. And you could also add keyframes to the light, the sunlight here, and rotate this around to make it day or night. And then one last thing that I wanted to show you to make the scene look really, really nice. If you want to add a glare or a glow around the earth, just to kind of make the atmosphere glow a little bit, you can do that in the compositor. So once you render out the image, what you can do is you can go right over here to the compositing tab. Then click on use nodes, and you should get this render layers and composite. And then also I'm going to make sure the backdrop is turned on. And if you don't have these render layers and composite, you can just press Shift A and add them. So what I want to do now is press Shift A, and I want to search for a glare node and just drop that in there. Now what I find works best for this is the fog glow, and then we can Control Shift and click on this, and we're going to be able to preview it in the background. Now this right here, if you want to change this around, you could change it to high. That seems to make a smaller glare or a smaller glow, and you could also turn it to low, and that seems to make a bit bigger of a glow. And then if you're not seeing anything happen, sometimes nothing really happens, that's because you need to turn this threshold. So what I do is I'm just going to start to turn this down. So I'm going to turn this to, instead of 1, I'm going to turn it to 0.9. And we'll just let that load up. I'm going to keep turning it down here. And you can see now that I'm getting down to like 0.2 or 0.3, now you can really start to see that. So if you just turn it down a little bit, that will make that little glow there on the side, and it looks really nice. All right, there we go. So that is the tutorial. That is the procedural earth material. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you learned a lot, and thank you for watching. And again, if you'd like to help support me and also get the project files for this tutorial, so you'll get the blend files and the final renders and even some of the animation videos and the node setup that you can use, then you can do that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the video description. And with that said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in a future video.